Old fool, you're stupid. You can't even shower by yourself anymore. The words cut through the air in the dining room, sharper than any knife that might have been on the mahogany table. They came from the mouth of my own son, David, echoing the contempt that my daughter-in-law, Sarah, and even my daughter, Emily, seemed to harbor for me lately. I, Márcia, 62 years old, a woman who built a life, raised a family, and always offered wisdom and support, was being reduced to a pathetic caricature. If you've ever felt ignored, underestimated, or worse, humiliated by those you love most, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your story might be more similar to mine than you imagine. The scene unfolded during one of those Sunday dinners that used to be sacred in our home in Greenwich, Connecticut. The smell of roast meat and red wine hung in the air, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Months earlier, my children and daughter-in-law had decided to invest a considerable portion of their savings in a revolutionary cryptocurrency fund that promised astronomical returns. I, with my years of experience in finance and a keen eye for business, had warned them. Be careful, children. It sounds too good to be true. The crypto market is volatile, and this particular company doesn't have a solid track record. My words were met with condescending laughter and pitying glances. "Oh, Mom, you're old-fashioned," David had said, rolling his eyes. "Things have changed. You don't understand these technologies anymore." That night, the reality of the disastrous investment began to hit home. The fund had plummeted, taking with it a substantial part of their money. Instead of acknowledging my warning, they blamed me for not supporting their decisions and for bringing negative energy. The humiliation reached its peak when David, frustrated and angry at the losses, blurted out the cruel phrase. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, merely smirked, and Emily, my daughter, looked away, unable to defend me. I felt the pain of betrayal and devaluation burn in my chest. That moment, however, ignited a flame of determination within me. They thought I was an old fool, incapable of showering by myself. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I had a secret, an endeavor that was quietly flourishing, and that would soon leave them in shock. The image of that dinner with David's cruel words and the complicit silence of Emily and Sarah became a catalyst. They saw me as a relic of the past, a woman who, after the death of my beloved husband John, had retreated into domestic life, tending her garden and reading books. What they didn't know was that behind the facade of a quiet grandma, a strategic mind, and an entrepreneurial spirit, which John had always admired, were simmering. Before marrying and dedicating myself to family, I had worked for years on Wall Street, not as a big executive, but as a shrewd financial analyst with a special talent for identifying trends and opportunities. This experience, which they considered outdated, was the foundation of my secret project. My venture began modestly, almost as a hobby. After John's passing, loneliness became a constant companion. To fill the void, I started researching investments in green technology, something John and I always discussed. I found a small startup in Palo Alto, California, that was developing innovative water purification technology using artificial intelligence. The idea captivated me. Instead of investing in volatile cryptocurrencies, I decided to bet on something tangible, with a real impact on the world. I used a portion of my own inheritance, which they didn't even know I had, and invested in the company. It wasn't an exorbitant amount, but enough to give me a significant stake. In the following months, while they mocked my old woman's worries and boasted about their modern investments, I spent hours studying reports, participating in online meetings, always with my microphone muted and camera off, of course, and closely monitoring the startup's growth. It was solitary work, but incredibly rewarding. With each small success of the company, I felt a pang of pride that contrasted with the pain of family humiliations. They saw a woman in pajamas watering her orchids. I saw an investor, a visionary, who was building something of value. The startup, which I mentally named Aquanova, was growing exponentially, driven by government contracts and increasing demand for sustainable solutions. What started as a way to pass the time had transformed into a highly profitable business, a secret I guarded closely, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. The fall of the family's cryptocurrency fund was faster and more brutal than I had anticipated. David, Emily, and Sarah, who had once exuded confidence, were now in a panic. The conversations at Sunday dinners, which had previously been about guaranteed profits, turned into heated arguments about debts and the imminent loss of their assets. "Mom, don't you have any savings put away?" David asked one day, his tone mixing desperation with a hint of demand. "Maybe some of Dad's money? We could use it to cover the losses and try to recover." I stared at him, remembering his cruel words. Old fool. The irony was palpable. They saw me as an emergency cash source, but still not as a source of wisdom. While their financial crisis deepened, Aquanova continued to prosper. I received news that the company had secured a multi-million-dollar contract with the federal government to implement its technology in several coastal cities, a huge step towards national expansion. The value of my shares skyrocketed, and I found myself in a financial position I never imagined achieving. The irony was that while my children and daughter-in-law were drowning in debt and despair, I was building a silent empire based on the investment principles they had ridiculed. I wondered when the truth would come out and how they would react to discover that the old fool they despised was, in fact, a green tech magnate. The humiliation, however, did not cease. On one occasion, Sarah, my daughter-in-law, came to my house asking to borrow a family jewel to pawn. "It's temporary, Márcia," she said, her eyes welling up. "Just until things get better." I knew things wouldn't get better for them anytime soon. The crypto fund was liquidated, and they were in debt. I refused the request, which resulted in more accusations of selfishness and lack of compassion. "You don't care about us, do you?" Emily, my daughter, confronted me later by phone. "You only think about yourself." Each word was a blow, but also a reminder of why I was doing this. It wasn't for petty revenge, but for justice, for recognition, and to show them the worth of a woman they had underestimated. Their situation was becoming unsustainable, and the moment of revealing my secret venture was fast approaching. They were about to discover that the old fool had much more to offer than they could ever imagine. My family's freefall reached its lowest point when I received a call from Emily, her voice choked with tears. "Mom, they're going to take David and Sarah's house." The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings, and they had only a few weeks to vacate the property in Fairfield. The desperation was palpable in her voice. "David is inconsolable, and Sarah won't stop crying. We have nowhere to go, Mom. No one wants to rent to them with the credit history they have now." The news hit me hard. Despite all the anger and hurt, they were still my family, my children. The thought of seeing them on the street was unbearable. That night, I hosted a dinner at my house, the first in months. The atmosphere was heavy, unlike previous dinners where the tension was veiled. Now, desperation hung in the air. David and Sarah were pale and distraught, their eyes swollen. Emily tried to maintain her composure, but her concern was evident. They came with a proposal, a last desperate attempt. "Mom, we know you have some savings," David began, his voice almost a whisper. "If you could lend us enough to cover the mortgage, we promise to pay it back, I swear." Sarah nodded frantically, her eyes fixed on me. I watched them, remembering every cruel word, every condescending laugh. "Old fool, you're stupid. You can't even shower by yourself anymore." The humiliation I felt at that dinner echoed in my mind. "Do you remember when I warned you about the investment?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Do you remember when you told me I didn't understand business, that I was too old for these things?" David and Sarah lowered their heads, ashamed. Emily, for the first time, looked at me with a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Mom, we were wrong," she said, her voice choked. "We were arrogant and disrespectful. But please don't let us lose everything." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the moment to decide whether I would let them sink or extend a hand, revealing the secret I had kept for so long. I took a deep breath, the weight of years of silence and hurt hanging in the air. "I'm not going to lend you money," I declared, and I saw their faces contort in despair. "But I can do something more." They looked at me, confused, not understanding. I got up from the table and walked to my small office, which used to be John's sewing room. I returned with a black leather briefcase, which I placed on the table. "You thought I was an old fool, that I didn't understand business, didn't you?" I began, opening the briefcase and pulling out some documents. While you were investing in digital fantasies, I was investing in something real, something that is changing the world. I pulled out a financial report from Aquanova with the company's logo prominently displayed. "This is Aquanova," I announced, observing the confusion on their faces. "A green technology company that develops water purification systems. I am one of the main investors." David took the report, his eyes scanning the numbers with disbelief. Sarah and Emily leaned in, trying to understand what was happening. But how?" David stammered, shock evident in his voice. "You never told us anything." "You never asked," I replied, my voice imbued with a calm that contrasted with the storm in their eyes. "You were too busy despising me, ignoring me, humiliating me." I showed them a newspaper article that talked about Aquanova's new multi-million-dollar contract with the government. This contract, for example, multiplied the value of my shares by more than 300% last week. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rustling of papers in David's hands. His eyes, once filled with despair, were now wide with shock and a hint of reluctant admiration. Sarah, who had previously looked at me with contempt, now stared at me with a mixture of astonishment and respect. Emily, my daughter, had tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. The old fool had revealed herself to be a shrewd businesswoman, and the shock on their faces was confirmation that the lesson, though painful, was beginning to be learned. The night of the revelation was long and filled with difficult conversations. They told me about the despair they felt, about the fear of losing everything, about how arrogance had blinded them to my warnings. I, in turn, explained to them the importance of valuing wisdom, experience, and above all, mutual respect. "Money comes and goes," I said, "but family, trust, respect, that's what truly matters." The next day, I made a decision. "I'm not going to pay your mortgage," I told David and Sarah, who looked at me with a mixture of hope and apprehension, "but I'm going to buy the house." The shock on their faces was evident. "You can continue living there, as my tenants, paying a fair rent, and if you wish, you can work for me at Aquanova." The proposal was a chance for redemption, an opportunity for them to rebuild their lives based on hard work and humility. David, with his engineering skills, could contribute to the company's infrastructure expansion. Sarah, with her event experience, could organize Aquanova's conferences and presentations. Emily, with her critical eye and intelligence, could work in communications. They accepted the proposal with a gratitude I had never seen before. The process of buying the house was quick, and their transition to new roles at Aquanova began. David, once arrogant, was now a dedicated and humble employee, actively seeking my advice. Sarah, who had once seen me as a rival, now treated me with respect and admiration, and Emily, my daughter, became my greatest ally, working tirelessly to promote the company's image and, more importantly, to rebuild our relationship. The old fool had become the matriarch of a new dynasty, and the family, once fragmented by greed and contempt, was uniting again, stronger and more conscious than ever. Years passed, and Aquanova became a global powerhouse in water purification technology. David, Sarah, and Emily prospered in their new roles, each contributing significantly to the company's success. The house in Fairfield, which was once on the verge of being lost, was now a safe and happy home where my grandchildren grew up, learning the value of hard work, humility, and respect. Sunday dinners became sacred again, but now they were filled with laughter, success stories, and above all, love and gratitude. I, Márcia, at 70 years old, was still the matriarch, but now I was viewed with the respect and admiration I had always deserved. My wisdom, once scorned, was now sought after and valued. The old fool had become the visionary who saved her family and built a legacy. The lesson they learned was harsh, but necessary. They discovered that a person's true worth is not in their age or appearance, but in their intelligence, resilience, and character. And I learned that sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is to allow people to face the consequences of their own choices, but always with the possibility of redemption. My family story is a testament that life can surprise us and that justice often arrives in unexpected ways. If you enjoyed this story of overcoming adversity, how wisdom can triumph over arrogance, and how family love can be rebuilt even after the greatest hardships, please like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. And tell me in the comments, what's the biggest lesson you've learned about family and respect?